as we worked our way from Kenya to Bosaso, it's a trip that takes some doing. We flew from Nairobi to Mogadishu, went from Mogadishu then to Hargeisa, and from Hargeisa we then flew into Bosaso. When we headed to Somalia, our goal was to get to Puntland. And the reason I wanted to go to Puntland was to get offshore. And one of the things I wanted to see were these two different security forces. One is called the PMPF, and it's got a really complicated and sordid history. It was initially a private outfit that had since been taken over by the government and now was run by the government and funded by the UAE. The other force on the water near Puntland is the SSS. This is a purely private company. It's Somali owned and it's sort of cloaked in even greater secrecy. What is known about SSS is that the SSS is out there with a large patrol ship and their job is to look for illegal fishing. And if they find any and they bring them to shore, it's corroborated that they were fishing illegally, then the bounty, the reward of the fines levied, half of it goes to the SSS company and the other half goes to the Puntland government. And that's part of how the SSS stays in business. So in essence, they're sort of modern day bounty hunters. So we were interested in checking out both of these forces and had been promised on the front end that we'd get access to both. When we finally got to Puntland, things were very different than we had been promised. We'd been promised access to both the PMPF and the SSS. But when we got there, those promises dissipated. Not only were we not going to get access to the vessels, but we really weren't going to be allowed to leave our hotel. Behind this change in fate was a guy named Kulmie, who is a high-level official in the Ministry of Fisheries. Kulmie is a fairly powerful figure. He's at one of the few ministries in Puntland that actually has a budget and has a source of revenue income. Kulmie is Somali, but he also has an Australian passport, and he was actually brought to Puntland by the current president of Puntland specifically to take over this job. Kulmie was in a complete panic that we were going to investigate corruption within the way that Puntland was giving fishing licenses. And indeed, as we spent time in Puntland, that level of panic increased. And our options became fewer and fewer in terms of reporting what officials we'd have access to and where we'd be allowed to go. We had a pretty well thought out, well designed reporting plan when we headed to Somalia, and of course none of it panned out. When we got there, the state government had no plans of letting us to the port or on the water or to talk to fishermen or to visit their security contractors. Toward the tail end of the reporting trip, in interviews and then also after I left, what became clear was that they did not want a reporter digging into the question of illegal fishing or of the presence of foreign boats or of how the state government was issuing licenses to foreign vessels, and in particular 7 Thai vessels that, when I headed there, were in Bosaso port and had just been given licenses in violation of the federal law by the Puntland government. And that was what they most didn't want me to delve into. Toward the end of the trip, we had developed fairly good sources. And what we were hearing was that Kulmie and the Puntland president had become convinced that I was part of the CIA and that I was there to undermine their credibility by casting light on the way that the ministry was giving fishing licenses. When word reached the Puntland government that we were coming to report there and investigate offshore crime, there was a meeting that occurred in the Ministry of Fisheries. In that meeting, there were two schools of thought as to how to handle these guys that were coming to investigate, this New York Times related guy and his team. One school of thought was block them, don't let them in, do not give them a visa. The other school of thought was let them in but contain them and control their access. And the debate apparently was fairly heated, and ultimately the latter side won, and we were granted a visa, but the plan was to really not let us out on the water, not let us interview anyone, not let us do anything. It was explained to me by security forces within Puntland and in Mogadishu and abroad that there were two threats that were emerging. There was one internal and one external threat. The external threat was a threat that everyone faced, and that was ISIS and Al-Shabaab. ISIS and Al-Shabaab had been very active in the surrounding region, and in the days we were there had really stepped up their efforts in the surrounding villages and in and near the city. On the afternoon before we finally got out, Al-Shabaab laid claim to the exploding of a bomb about 6 blocks from our hotel. So there was real concern that Al-Shabaab was making a go at Bosaso, and hotels are a favorite target, and everyone in the city knew that there were these Westerners staying at this one hotel, and for that reason there was a good chance that they would try to hit the hotel. The internal threat we were hearing about was one that was emanating from within the Puntland government itself. This theory that had really become pervasive that we were CIA and we were there as part of a CIA effort to destabilize the local government. What we were hearing is that the hotel internally was not safe. There were lots of different armed groups, militias at the hotel, some of them staying there, some of them protecting it, some of them just hangers-on. It was a walled fortress, so a compound, but within that compound there were lots of different armed players, and it was not clear that all of them were trustworthy. So on the final night that we were there, the hotel manager, who was among those who was telling us that he was receiving intel that it was really unsafe for us to be there, but we had no place else to go. The roads were not safe for us to travel, leave the compound. There was no other hotel that was really thought to be even more secure. There were no commercial flights out. There were no private flights that we could even rent. So we were stuck until the next morning. And so we sort of devised a plan with the hotel manager. We had a meeting, and the plan was to stay in our rooms as much as possible. When night fell, move all our stuff into one room, keep the lights on, make it seem like we were in those rooms, and then discreetly late at night move to the roof. And on the roof, we'd be there with no one in the hotel knowing, except for a couple of the guards that our security guy most trusted, and we'd spend the night up there. Partially because you could see the whole surrounding compound better, and there were escape routes that you could figure out better, but partially also as a decoy. Everyone knew which rooms we were, but they didn't know that we weren't in those rooms. So that's what we did. Spent the last night on the hotel roof with a couple guards, armed guards. There was gunfire that night beyond the walls of the compound, but the compound was not hit, and 5 a.m. came not soon enough. We convoyed as fast as we could to the airport.